The reasoning behind the creation of a super third generation AI was to help in fighting the Human Covenant War in Operation Red Flag, a mission which would be planned to capture a Covenant hierarch and try broker a truce on the war. ONI at the time was looking for a way to pull this operation off, but their options were few and limited. That's where Dr. Catherine Halsey came into the mix. With persistence, she proposed that a new smart AI that could not only infiltrate Covenant software but also fuse together with her Spartans could be the tool for the job. But her method would consist of a highly illegal process known as flash cloning, in which the subject would flash clone themselves and then extract the brains for AI submissions. For Halsey to have her plans approved, she had to beg to the ONI higher-ups, doing her best to prove that this could be the turning tide needed for the UNSC's side of the war. After some persuading, it worked, and by the 21st of May 2549, she began the flash cloning process. Dr. Halsey had cloned herself 20 times using the flash cloning process that would over the months grow rapidly into young women that resembled a much younger complexion of herself. But out of the 20 flash clones, only 2 survived. She surgically extracted their brains successfully and moved them to cryogenic chambers, flash incinerating any organic material that remained. The creation of a smart AI is no simple feat and would take precision in planning and development before Cortana could be made. An early version of her was actually created back on the 19th of March in 2537, known as Calmia. Calmia at this time was created as a test for developing future techniques and algorithms. These would later be used to produce Cortana. The older sister would have a very similar look in design to Cortana, but having a green hue instead of a bluey purple one. Calmia was also not made from Dr. Halsey's cloned brain samples, and most likely created from dead and donated brain tissue that would have been altered during the AI birthing process. On November 7th, 2549, she would begin the process of converting one of the flash clone's brains to the early birthing stages of an artificial intelligence by transferring the specimen's neural pattern to an AI matrix strata. This would be the birth of Cortana. Her first words were, "When the game is over, the king and the pawn go back in the same box," repeating what Halsey's mother had said to her after beating her at chess. A curious statement showing her shared personality with Dr. Halsey. The AI matrix known as CTN-0452-9 had officially named herself Cortana and choosing the shape of a younger Halsey, but alternative with a blue hue and flowing blue symbols. Cortana was essentially the most powerful third generation human-made AI in existence at the time, all thanks to Dr. Halsey's controversial method of construction, using her own and honestly rather impressive brain. Her early life was confined to the lab underneath Castle Base on Planet Reach, where she would assist Dr. Halsey with whatever project she had. One of which was recovering data from an ancient crashed Forerunner ship that lay dormant beside Halsey's underground lab beneath Sword Base. But it was all soon to change as the tide of the war grew closer, and in July 26 of 2552, the Covenant had found Reach. The fall of Reach had begun, and over the months, masses of both UNSC and Covenant would clash in one of the bloodiest battles of the Human Covenant War. It was this day that Dr. Halsey would first be introduced to Noble Team, originally placed on Reach to fight the insurrectionists. The team fought off a Covenant corvette along with its ground forces, defending Sword Base, of which Halsey had been hiding there in her underground lab, with Cortana to extract the data they needed. One of the Spartans from Noble Team, Cat B320, had recently acquired ONI data from a previous engagement that contained what would be confirmed later as a latchkey discovery. As Halsey was extracting the data, Cortana would later use this data to help find the location of another Forerunner structure deep in space. This structure later being revealed as the first found Halo ring, Installation 04. By August 3rd, 2552, Halsey and Cortana both agreed to divide herself into two fractures, one half to be sent with participating Spartans in Operation Red Flag to hand over her expertise and assist the Spartans, the other half to stay and help Dr. Halsey decipher the symbols discovered within a Forerunner ship underneath Swordbase. On the 14th of August, Halsey decided that Noble Team could be a vital unit in assisting her with the delivery of Cortana's secondary fragment used in the lab. Cortana was asked which Spartan from Noble Team she would like to be her courier. Her 6 choices at the time varied from a Spartan 3 commander to a Spartan 2 chief warrant officer, once kidnapped by Dr. Halsey herself. But her sights landed on the Spartan B312, designation Noble 6 at the time, to reunite her with Master Chief on the Pillar of Autumn and her second fragment. However, Halsey would struggle at this time to make contact with Noble Team, since they had been scattered after the events of Operation Uppercut. By the 29th of August 2552, what remained of Noble Team would regroup with Dr. Halsey and recover Cortana's secondary fragment. Her other fragment, or primary fragment at the time, was finally implemented with the Master Chief and his Mark V Mjolnir. The two began a test devised by Colonel James Ackerson, a rival of Dr. Halsey who was always against the Spartan 2 program. He did his best to sabotage the test in an attempt to either kill or damage Spartan 117, using ludicrous amounts of resources all for a test. A range of armaments from Lotus tank mines to ODSTs were deployed. But thanks to Cortana, she was able to enhance Chief's reflexes and motor skills, as well as providing an unrivaled intelligence and battlefield tactics to assist John in making it through the death trap mostly unharmed. As the two prevailed through the test, the next phase of Operation Red Flag was underway. The Master Chief, along with a team of Spartans, would be tasked with Operation Red Flag and was ordered to regroup with Captain Keyes among the Pillar of Autumn. However, Operation Red Flag would never be fully initiated. Cortana's primary fragment was placed into the Autumn, giving her access to controls and weapon functionality, as well as some ONI databases. Digging through the information, she found the origins of the Master Chief and the Spartan 2 program. By August 30th, the Covenant fleet of Particular Justice appear 300 strong above Reach. The Pillar of Autumn at the time, evacuating Reach for Red Flag, was forced to return, making their way back to recover Cortana's secondary fragment from Noble Team. Spartan teams from the Pillar of Autumn are forced to split into multiple different fire teams in order to fill out multiple objectives, with the Master Chief's 3-man fire team sent to initiate Cold Protocol on Gamma Station, an orbital platform above Reach. He succeeds in doing so, as well as recovering a Sergeant Johnson but losing Spartan James 005 in the process, as well as a Spartan Linda 058 being critically injured. After returning to the Pillar of Autumn, now hiding in an old shipyard, the Master Chief is placed into cryostasis along with Linda 058, awaiting to once again evacuate Reach and enter slipspace. At this time, Keyes himself would deploy from the ship personally to receive the fragment from Spartan B312. But before being able to escape the planet once more, a Covenant cruiser sent from the fleet makes an attempt to glass the now discovered Pillar of Autumn. The remaining Noble 6 stays behind to destroy the ship using a mass driver, giving them the extra anti-air power they needed to escape the planet. Noble 6 sacrifices his life for the Pillar of Autumn, Captain Keyes, the Master Chief, and Cortana. This would be remembered as a key moment in stopping the Covenant. As the Autumn left Reacher's orbit, Captain Keyes ordered Cortana to jump the ship in a random vector to escape the fleet of Particular Justice. Little did he know that Cortana had actually set a course using the ancient data she gathered from the Forerunner ship buried beneath Swordbase, as well as coordinates from a Covenant extraction operation over Ectanos 4, leading the Pillar of Autumn to the Sowell system. However, just before leaving, Cortana, feeling rather vengeful at Colonel Ackerson, decided to mischievously send in a file to the higher-ups in UNSC Command, forged by Cortana as Ackerson, to be sent to the front line, getting her revenge for her now partnered Spartan 117. On September 18th, 2552, the Pillar of Autumn exits slipspace and finds itself at the now newly discovered Halo Ring Installation 04. However, due to the Covenant ships being far more efficient at slipspace travel, the fleet of Particular Justice managed to get there weeks before the Pillar of Autumn. The Covenant fleet, run by Fel Vadam at the time, ambushes the Pillar of Autumn, sending boarding crafts to take over the ship. After failing at controlling the ship, he resorts to destruction and opens fire in a naval battle, forcing the humans to crash land to Halo. With no true solution to fight back against the fleet, Captain Keyes ordered the evacuation of the ship. Cortana is placed back within the Master Chief's Mark V Mjolnir to keep safe and prevent the Covenant getting a hold of her. The Pillar of Autumn, along with the Captain Keyes, crash lands on the ring. Cortana and the Master Chief land a Bumblebee escape pod into the ring's surface. Cortana was completely thrilled at the idea of the knowledge that lays ahead of her and hopes to discover more about the ring world as the two fight their way to the UNSC survivors scattered around the Halo. They eventually manage to regroup with the UNSC forces and rescue the recently kidnapped Captain Keyes by using Cortana's help to break through Covenant security systems within the Truth and Reconciliation, a ship docked in the ring's atmosphere. Once the captain was rescued, the two would next be tasked with finding the Silent Cartographer, a map room that would lead to the Halo's control room. Chief escorted Cortana to the Cartographer, but not before having to disable the Halo security systems due to the Covenant locking the door to the map room. After disabling the security and discovering the location of the control room, their next objective was to infiltrate it. Cortana accessed underground tunnels within the Halo ring that would aid the Master Chief and his pilot in safely crossing vast distances quickly and surprising any enemies around the control room. After the Master Chief fought through the Covenant defences, they finally made it. Cortana was inserted into the Forerunner control terminal, and all at once, vast amounts of information was uncovered, including the secrets of the Flood and Halo's true purpose. Before the Master Chief could ask any more questions, Cortana told John that he needed to get to the captain and stop him before he was captured and consumed by the Flood. The Master Chief, confused but concerned, rushes to the last known location of Captain Keyes. Meanwhile, Cortana, with access to the ring's control centre, manages to uncover more and more secrets of the Forerunners. She discovers that the ring was created millennia ago in order to combat an ancient enemy, the Flood. The Flood of which were an alien parasite out to consume all biomass within the galaxy. She also discovers that in order to activate the ring, she would need something called an index, a key to turning the gears that would begin the activation sequence. As she waited for John, more and more information was uncovered, discovering what a monitor was and its purpose in the ring. She watched using Halo security and monitoring systems as John unwillingly helped the 343 guilty spark. As the Master Chief finally did return, she noticed that the previously detailed monitor was with him and persuading the unknowing Chief to activate Installation 04. Before he could, however, Cortana restrained the index from the two, giving her the time to explain Halo's true purpose to the Master Chief. Once explained in full detail, the two began a path to get back to the Pillar of Autumn, to overload its engines and destroy the ring. But before Cortana could locate the Pillar of Autumn, she advised Chief that destroying the 3 main pulse generators of the ring would help prevent the activation of the ring. A fail-safe idea, just in case the monitor found a way to activate Halo without using the index. With the generators destroyed, the next objective was to find the captain. Due to how the Pillar of Autumn security systems worked, it could only be overloaded by the use of the captain's implants embedded into his neural interface. In an attempt to reach Captain Keyes quickly enough, Cortana tried to use the ring's teleportation grid, seen used by the monitor, but in order for it to work, she would need an excessive amount of power to pull the jump off. Luckily, Chief's Mark V Mjolnir had enough to do the trick, but was also potentially dangerous at damaging the suit, which would later explain during the Chief's change into his Mark VI at the time that the armourer was baffled by how he had ruined the Mark V to such an extent. Anyway, Cortana and Chief made their way through the damaged Truth and Reconciliation, recovering the implant instead of the now deceased Captain Keyes. Master Chief escaped the flood's wake by taking a damaged Banshee left over in one of the docking bays and making their way to the crash site. After hours of flying, he manages to enter the Pillar of Autumn by using one of the now empty escape pod bays. Making their way to the bridge, Cortana uses the implant to begin a timed initiation sequence that would overload the fusion engines. But before it can go through, 343 Guilty Spark sabotages the plan, forcing the Master Chief to manually overheat the engines by destroying the shielding with some well-placed explosives. Cortana is forced to calculate the time it would take before the ship's engines now go supernova. With the countdown determined, Cortana makes contact with Echo 419, a surviving pilot, and directs Chief to a landing pad which they could evac from. On his way to a Warthog, however, a flood infection form manages to find its way onto John's armour, slicing a tendril through the neck lining. Before Chief could be infected though, Cortana uses the Mjolnir's power systems once more by redirecting the power towards the infection form's location. She destroys the creature with a pop, saving the Master Chief's life. They finally make it to a Warthog, and Chief boots it to the extraction point. But before the Pelican could land, 2 Banshees tailed the bird, blasting it down. With only one remaining spacefaring longsword aboard the ship, Cortana redirects Chief towards their last chance of evac. After a tense race against the clock, they manage to make it. Running into the cockpit, Chief places Cortana into the system, giving her the controls. They escape the Halo and watch as the ring implodes, sending debris of its former self across the galaxy. As they flew, Cortana attempts to scan for any other survivors, but to no avail, finding only dust and echoes. After another 30 minutes or so of floating near the planet Threshold, Cortana discovers the cryopods that had been evacuated from the Pillar of Autumn before its emergency landing. These cryopods would contain the critically injured Linda 058. Cortana would also discover a surviving Pelican hiding from the scanning Covenant forces that remained from the fleet of Particular Justice. Using Cortana's help, Chief docked the longsword onto the Pelican, discovering survivors from the Pillar of Autumn. The total of them, including a still-alive Sergeant Johnson, devised a plan to board one of the Covenant's slip-space-worthy ships, known as Ascendant's Justice, and take over, wiping out the crew. Cortana assists the squad by plugging into the ship's controls once aboard, and decompressing most of the Covenant forces, leaving them to suffocate throughout the ship. The ragtag crew then managed to fly the ship, with Cortana's help, into the high atmosphere of Threshold. From there, Cortana takes advantage of the Covenant ship's advanced slipspace technology and enters slipspace while still inside the atmosphere. Their destination would be decided by Chief towards the recently glassed planet of Reach. They make it to the ruins of the world, and they discover that some of the Spartans left before the Battle of Installation 04 had survived. Cortana dispatched Chief and the squad from the Ascendant Justice using a spirit dropship. She then keeps the ship above the atmosphere, away from any other curious Covenant vessels. But with the Covenant AI still aboard the stolen ship, it sends out a signal any other vessels close by to assist it. Whilst the Covenant AI begins its cry for help, Cortana uses the distraction to her advantage, wiping out the AI and tearing its code apart. Unluckily though, the AI still managed to let out a warning, forcing Cortana to take naval action and engaging an oncoming ship. She disables it and quickly jumps to the edge of the Reach Epsilon Eridani system, waiting there until rendezvous. With time to wait, she decided to decipher the Covenant's AI codes, discovering that the Covenant possess the coordinates of Earth. Once the Master Chief completes his mission of regrouping with the surviving Spartan team, as well as Dr. Halsey and Admiral Danforth Whitcomb, they escape the glass planet once again, bringing along with it a surviving frigate, the UNSC Gettysburg. Cortana makes a jump into slipspace, and after moments of travel, manages to find themselves in a battle within slipspace. The engagement was far more than just dangerous, but due to the heroics of the Spartans and the Admiral, they managed to survive, but at the cost of a few Spartans. After evading their pursuers and exiting slipspace, Cortana informs the Master Chief that the Covenant had discovered Earth and were preparing to invade with a huge fleet. She also reveals to the crew that they were in the Eridanus system. Master Chief suggested heading towards the Eridanus Secundus, a small rebel base embedded in an asteroid. They make their way there and dock with the insurrectionist base after a tense conversation over a transmission. The insurrectionist governor, known as Jacob Giles, invites them in for a discussion over dinner. As the squad arrive, they warn them about the Covenant and that they're most likely going to discover the asteroid very soon. After more tense arguments and blaming, a Covenant cruiser finds itself in the vicinity of Secundus. Cortana begins an offensive counter using the Ascendant Justice and the attached Gettysburg. She blasts what was essentially an overcharged plasma Mach round into the ship. After defending Secundus, the governor agrees to assist the team and allows repairs to be made to whatever extent they can. However, not long after the small battle, 30 more Covenant vessels manage to find themselves outside of Secundus. With no way to fight a small fleet, the recently rescued Admiral orders Cortana to jump into slipspace, leaving behind the governor and the rest of the insurrectionists that live aboard Secundus. During their time in slipspace, the Master Chief notes what Cortana had recently revealed, that the Covenant invasion force needed to be dealt with before going back to Earth. The Admiral reluctantly agrees and then devises a plan to split up. The remaining Spartans would board a dropship and then surgically implant themselves within the superfleet's unyielding Hierophant by using Cortana's AI copy. This copy is essentially wearing the recently deceased Covenant AI's code, almost like a disguise. As the Spartan team complete the mission, they manage to lose Grace 093 in the process, but the objective carried out is overall a success. Cortana and the remaining squad realise with horror that overloading the Hierophant's engines wouldn't be enough to destroy the fleet. So to compensate, the team improvises in moving the slipspace drive from the Ascendant's Justice to the still active Gettysburg. Once done, the Ascendant's Justice begins a collision course into the fleet's path. The fleet is then destroyed. What was left of the squad escape back to Earth using the Ascendant's Justice slipspace drive they had now attached to the Gettysburg. With Operation First Strike complete, it would take the squad a month to return to Earth space. Today's Patreon shoutout includes Corporal Hot Pockets and Verinith. Stick around on the channel and keep your eyes out for part 2.